Hey everybody, Eric.
I'm Dr. Nick. Just
Uh,
kidding. Uh, Hi, everybody. I'm Eric.
I shouldn't have changed my camera, but I just did.
Justin. Oh, I can't see it anyway, so
Yeah, I'm Justin, and we're Sonic Bloom.
how you doing?
Good. It's been a week. It's been a week. Busy
It
week.
has. Yep.
Waiting for you to send stuff my way.
Yep. I'm working on it. We're
Mm-hmm.
slowly churning through things, getting through the backlog.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
So,
yeah, if you're new to this show, every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, Eric and I here, we put on a show called Sonic Bloom TV, where we tap dance. Actually, it's not called Sonic Bloom Live TV, it's called Sonic Bloom Live. But we cover the latest game industry news of the week, focusing mostly like on industry specific stuff, less reviews and like gossip, and more about hey, this thing's happening in the industry and it's important and you should be focusing on it. So we take that kind of approach. Um, Hopefully you like it. If you do like it, you should like and subscribe because that helps us out. Otherwise, you can just enjoy the show because there's really nothing that prevents you from doing that. I should double check here just to make sure that we're actually streaming.
we had technical issues recently. We keep running into things. We're trying to get over them and make sure that we have this whole streaming thing down.
And Google Music decided to pop up on my computer for reasons. Weird. Yeah, we are streaming as far as I can tell.
You know what I can do is
Yeah, we're good.
go
We're
to,
good.
go to our page. Yeah, we're definitely streaming.
Yeah, I have both pages open so I can check on it. Yeah, anyways. So, Sonic Boom Live. Hey, this is all going to get cut out by the time we actually finish this thing. But if you're on Twitch, you can probably watch it for a week before it goes down. Um, and I cannot watch myself in a delayed feed because that's really confusing.
Yes, it is. I had to just shut mine off too.
Yeah,
Maybe there's a way to just mute it so you can follow along with the questions, but
yeah, I got it.
um,
Yeah, anyways.
yeah.
So, we're Sonic Boom Live. Welcome, everybody. This week, the news that we'll be focusing on is Eric. Do you want to cover the first topic? Well,
Yeah, sure.
highlight
What's that?
highlight the first topic.
Yeah, okay. The first topic we'll be talking about today is Square Enix selling off a couple of the Western, actually all of its Western developers, development studios to Embracer Group. Um, we'll dig into that later. Justin, what's our second thing?
Yeah, and if you've been following any game news, you probably caught wind of it because that was I think the biggest thing that happened this week.
Yep.
But what kind of flew under the radar a bit because of this big Square Enix bombshell was that New York State is going to be pressing legal action against Activision. Um, it's kind of an interesting case because while there are many Activision lawsuits for their treatment of employees, this one is taking a bit of a different approach and may stick a little bit better than the other cases that either have been settled by now or are still in progress but have rumors of it being compromise cases. We'll go over that. And the last topic, Eric, is
Yep. Yeah, just real quick about that last one. It may be the case that people are just getting sort of tired of seeing Activision come up with these lawsuits.
well, not
They're
just
like, oh, there's
Activision.
another one.
For people ignoring it,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
possibly.
But related slightly, is Nintendo has its own lawsuits against it. Well, related, technically. It's not actually being filed against Nintendo corporate directly. Indirectly, it is. But in this case, there are some workers that are under, permatemp with to Nintendo through some third-party temp agency. And Reggie Fils-Aime. I've never actually heard his name
Kizame.
spoken. Fils-Aime?
That's what I always thought it was, but
Reggie Phil. I always read it as Reggie Fils-Aime or Amy. I actually don't know what I just read it. Reggie. We'll say Reggie, Nintendo Reggie.
Who was?
So he was the COO and I think at various upper level positions at Nintendo of America for quite a while. He was sort of the public face at large events and pressers, where if back in the aughts and 2010s, at least part of the 2010s, Reggie would be the face that would provide the Western, the main face for the Western speaking media to get their information. Now we have Nintendo Directs, but back then it was Reggie for the West. And Reggie is chiming in on this and giving his opinion on the labor dispute. So we're going to cover sort of what his perspective is on it.
And I will say that it seems to go a bit deeper too, beyond like just Reggie like sort of chiming in on it. There was additional information brought up by IGN, who I guess had been collecting complaints from people for some time. And finally reported a pretty substantial dump of here's like the breadth of complaints that we have towards Nintendo of America. So we'll discuss that. It's broader, in a broader context amongst the game industry and what this might mean for Nintendo as well. So if that's interesting to you, follow us along tonight and like and subscribe if you like this type of content. So let's just jump right into it, Eric. Do you want to cover the first topic? Do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. I'll dig into it. Square Enix is selling their Western developers. This is mostly consists of Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal or Eidos in general.
It's Eidos in general because I think they
overall.
But the other weird one was that they are selling Square Enix Montreal as well, which is an independent studio. I don't know if they'll probably be renamed, but yeah, that studio goes with it.
Right. And that accounts for 1,100 employees. They are also selling the vast majority of their IP, which includes Tomb Raider, Deus Ex, Thief, Legacy of Kaine, Gex, and a whole lot more.
Yeah, I like dropping the Gex in there. A title that's not been released since like
PlayStation 1, maybe
PS2?
2.
PS1. They might have had a PS2 version, but
like
it didn't.
Yeah,
it didn't.
Gex the Gecko.
Yeah. Gex Enter the Gecko. Yeah, it was a wacky game, but Crystal Dynamics still holds the rights to that. I think.
I think it was an original IP for them, wasn't it?
Yes. So,
yeah.
to get that too.
So at any rate. They also, anyway, so this Embracer Group is buying all this stuff. The price tag on this is a mere $300 million, which, when you look at it, $300 million, let's be real, it's a lot of money. However, on the scale of things, the amount of IP that's transferring hands here, the amount of like Tomb Raider alone, this is ridiculous. A game made by either Crystal Dynamics or Eidos Montreal probably has a budget, depending on the scale of the project in question, between $50 and $200 million.
Yeah,
and all of these in one big bundle are being sold for $300 million all at once, which is like, for me, that was the biggest shock of this news. This piece of news was like, wow, that feels like a fire sale.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the shocking part of the whole thing is that it feels like a fire sale. It was abrupt, and kind of like not really suspected. There were rumors that Sony was going to be buying Square Enix and all this other stuff, but I guess we'll get into that later on. But it was a bit of a shocker to be like, whoa, these are some pretty hefty studios. It's weird that Embracer Group got them for one, and two, it's weird that Square Enix like just sort of shucked off these studios,
shed them.
Yeah, it's just kind of odd.
Yeah, It might have been. So what are the possible motivations here? I mean, one of the things that they stated was that one of the factors that they were looking into, and I'm bringing this up because it's somewhat controversial depending on who you talk to. One of the factors was that they were interested in looking into refocusing some of their efforts at their headquarters on blockchain technologies and that space.
Yeah.
And crypto. What other kind of theories do we have that people have put forward, or statements from Square Enix themselves?
I mean, Square has only specifically said that it was so that they can refocus their efforts on specifically as blockchain, cloud computing, and AI.
Right.
Like that was their area of refocus. $300 million to focus on those things for a company as large as Square seems a little understated. Like, it doesn't necessarily pay for that, or will pay for that, but it's not like Square couldn't be investing in that anyways. Sometimes these things are just like their investor buzzy words, like
right.
And no one's actually shown proof positive that there is a surefire way of making money in either cryptocurrencies not cryptocurrencies, but blockchain and NFT usage. Right. There's plenty examples of people getting rich by basically
pumping and dumping.
Yeah, pumping and dumping, scamming, that sort of thing, with a handful of things. So it's like I don't know exactly what their play would be there, if they're just using those words to pique investor interest,
right?
Or if they really think that they can get away, as many large game studios have talked about, like using NFTs to generate additional income, open up different revenue streams. But
right,
I don't know. There's not much said. There's not much known about what their actual plans are. All I think that can be said is that the gaming population does not like to be used as a guinea pig for monetization, and usually sees a good amount of backlash whenever a beloved game publisher decides, hey, you know what? Let's stop making good games. Let's focus on just how to pull as much money out from you as possible.
Right. Well, let's actually also make a distinction there. The console gaming market and console and PC gaming market don't generally historically have rebelled hard against that. Mobile seems to be more willing to try different things, and
you just have a large enough audience where there's someone willing to,
right?
If you have a global population to work with, even 100,000 people, like generating NFTs for you and doing whatever can still make you a lot of money.
Yeah, if you can make it simple enough for them to do it and then buy and incentivize them to do all that. I'm talking. Yeah. I'm not talking about blockchain. I'm talking more about like all the models where, like, back 10 years ago, we were figuring out how to identify and target whales, right? And I say we as the overall games industry, but I specifically mean mobile. Like, that type of company was really perfecting and iterating on that model of trying to find the right type of tiny little dinky game mechanic that they could, and UI and UX that would trigger these responses to get people to buy and spend more money to create crystals or gems and just dump money into this little mobile game. That model has never worked super well, as far as I'm aware, in the console and PC market, but it does find a way to survive in casual and mobile.
The thing that works well in the console game market is things like Fortnite, where you can get people to buy virtual currency to play a free-to-play game that actually has sticky mechanics, and you invest in your character, and then like, this is the horse armor times 1,000 or whatever. Right.
Yeah, it's personalization stuff, and there are people out there that really get into it, that really get into the multiplayer aspect and want to not look the same as everybody else. If they even have done that to an extent. I'm not sure if they sell the items, but like in Soul Calibur and other combat games, or like fighting games, they'll allow you, most games nowadays will allow you to like fully customize the outfits of your characters so that they look almost entirely different. I had a friend who took one of the I want to say it's Astaroth was the name. I can't remember exactly. It may be it, but the big brute guy in Soul Calibur 5 or 6 or whatever it was, and made him look like the Hulk. right? Like
Yeah.
they gave him purple shorts, colored his skin green, and like it was basically the Hulk. Like you can do that nowadays, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've monetized certain since there is competitive online multiplayer. You know, you see your opponent's character, and they have all the customizations.
Yeah, I mean,
that seems to be
the avatar thing, right? Like you create
right.
an avatar that's something that personalizes, and I think that's worked in the console gaming space, and using money to buy or like in-game currencies that you purchase with real money to buy minor perks that can get you leg up. Most of the like slot machine mechanics that we've seen come from EA. And other big publishers that just are trying to invest in like $100 million game that can generate money indefinitely. A lot of the ones that have like the intent of milking people for money tend to fail because it's just it's transparent as much as they try to make it not transparent. It always seems to be. So yeah, that's. It looks like Square wants to go this route. I don't really know how. The only online game they really have that's been working, that at least I know, is like their Final Fantasy Online, which is still going on. Who knows? Maybe they'll make some other future game that appeals to the Japanese audiences. Yeah,
the next Final Fantasy 20 is going to be online. It will be, and all of the character items are going to be NFT based, so they won't be resold through a marketplace internally. You'll be selling them on a blockchain enabled thing. You have to pay gas fees or whatever. And Sony will take a cut of every sale, or not Sony, excuse me, Square Enix will take a cut of every sale after that, and maybe use those funds to keep the game going.
Yeah.
Or in addition to the subscription fees, who knows?
Yeah.
Also, everything will be AI driven. I'm trying to bind up all of what Square Enix announced into their next Final Fantasy big
now, like for game. All of these technologies that they say, there's obviously good uses on aspects of it in different places, but it's like never is it actually like iterated in such a way that you're like, oh, I see the real value in this now. It's usually like, oh, we're using AI in ways that are stupid. You're like, yeah, but there's so many better things that AI could be put towards if you just want to put the R&D behind it, like that sort of thing. And it's always going to be half-hearted. If anything, it's just going to be a bullet point on an investor deck. What is worth actually stating about Square Enix is that for the longest time, they've just been really displeased with the performance of their Western developers, and not because the Western developers have been making bad games, but because like they underperform in ways that are unfathomable. And it goes back to like the 2013 release of the Tomb Raider reboot, in which it sold better than any prior Tomb Raider. And it's still underperformed in the eyes of Square Enix. And it's like, I don't know what exactly they were expecting. But, this is what they end up with. And they said the same thing about Marvel Avengers, which more reasonably probably massively underperformed for them. But the same thing with Guardians of the Galaxy, which actually performed fairly well. Not gangbusters like you'd probably expect from a title carrying like such a strong IP like that. But to them, all of those were failures, and so you see this like repeated situation where their Western developer studios, whether it be the cost to develop the game, minus the actual sales that they make on the game, is just not breaking even for them, and just causing them losses. You have any thoughts on this, Eric?
I do have thoughts. I think, as to a little bit of background, I spent a number of years living and working in the games industry, and living in Japan and working in the games industry there, and seeing firsthand sort of some aspects of the development space there, and while just living there, the types of games that resonated and sold very well in Japan and how they were marketed and everything. And I think all that sort of feeds into this. Square Enix is a decidedly Japanese company. And as publisher for those the Western companies, part of their role is to handle marketing of the games. Now, okay, this is a bit of speculation here. Well, I'm not even going to go so far as to speculate. I'm going to talk about angles that could be related to what might be happening here. I'm not going to say I think this is what's happening. But it's possible that what Square Enix has been doing is realizing, our marketing efforts are not paying off in Japan, in the Western markets. The way we can market here to Japanese people, the way we know how to market games works great. We sell very well our games and the homegrown ones here in Japan. Outside of the US or outside of Japan, they don't do quite as gangbusters, but a lot of the well-known titles like Final Fantasy games will, the big ones will do well. But how much of that is based on the name merit alone versus, actual interest in the story or whatever has been teased. And then outside of that, their experience has been their own Western studios, which they're now selling in terms of how those are marketed. And when they can look at that and say, well, everything is underperforming, it could be a piece of what's being, what's happening here. Is that they're realizing, what, our strength is not in the Western market and trying to foster Western developed games with huge budgets and being able to successfully sell those in the market. Because clearly, and I'm saying clearly here and basing this on the number, top 10, 20, 30, 50 sales, games sold in Japan over any period of time. And very rarely are there sort of the large Western titles that we see doing very well here in the West, Europe and America, North America, doing, South America probably, but also doing as well in the Japanese market. In the Japanese market, if you look at the top selling games, which Justin and I did a little while ago, just to see what was going on, like Nintendo dominated that list. And most of them were like little card games and this and that. They were not the big West titles that were in the AAA titles that we're used to seeing here.
Yeah.
It's a very different marketplace. Yeah. Oh, the AAA, I should say this, the AAA titles that did sell well in Japan were Final Fantasy games.
Yeah, I mean, stuff of that nature.
Amongst a couple others, but yeah.
I mean, I think the point is right, though, which is that, like, Square Enix, I think, has shown over and over again that it does not know how to market games in general to a Western audience.
Yeah.
And it certainly doesn't know how to develop the multi-million-dollar games that are these Western developed games and sell them to the Western market, and they just fail repeatedly there. So I don't, like, I guess it's kind of good and bad. It's like, okay, Square finally gets to focus on what it does well. Right. Depending on your perspective of how Square Enix has transformed over years, and stop trying to make things like Deus Ex or Tomb Raider, which are still great games, but like fail in ways that are kind of hard to comprehend when a game that is as well produced and it has carried such a strong IP like Tomb Raider still manages to underperform. It's just like either your marketing failed or you're producing them too often, or whatever it is. It's just it may be actually true that Square just doesn't really have the right corporate mindset to be dealing with these types of games, and would rather, and is probably best off handling, going back to its core franchises that it started off making. Well, at least between Square and Enix.
We're trying to get them into the blockchain, of course.
For that, yeah.
As according to their statement. So, that's a big aspect of it. In terms of the most recent big games that have been released from those Western studios, as far as I'm aware, you're looking mostly at the Avengers game, which did not sell well and was critically pretty well panned. Like, people talked about it, like, looked good, but they had some serious game loop and mechanical problems. I never played it. I never directly read through an entire review myself, but and then the second game, the even more recent game than that, was Guardians of the Galaxy, which for all intents and purposes reviewed very well, and is a very fun game, but appears to have suffered from some sort of marketing problem, or I have my own personal opinion as to why that may have been a tough one to market in general, but that's just my personal opinion.
But I think it's still failure to market. Like,
Yeah, agreed.
I think your main complaints that we've talked about here is that, its closeness to the
Movie
Avengers game that didn't do well, its closeness like in its weird parody of the movies, and just not being able to do a good job at differentiating those things, and that's still a marketing and communication problem that stems directly from the company itself.
Right. From the publisher.
Yeah, publisher.
Well, that's
the
presumably
publisher's marketing budget and the publisher's marketing plan that they follow. Whether or not they want to roll out a developer or a studio head to talk about it is up to them. So okay. So let's move on from there, because I think the topic's been covered enough. Basically, we just don't know enough about any of it.
Why?
I will say, I mean, we just know that Embracer Group purchased them for $300 million.
Yeah.
Square Enix is now like a primarily Japanese developer-focused publisher, and blockchain. The one thing, my one hope, and I think people have said this before, is that the Legacy of Kaine franchise gets a second chance at becoming relevant again.
Yes. It'd
be nice at the very least. So if anybody from Embracer is listening to this, that's a back catalog game I'd like to see. So far we've been doing pretty well with it. Like, I think we were talking about Dead Space before Dead Space remake was announced, or like Dead Space needs to be remade.
Yeah. They just need to contract Amy Hennig again. Get her. Yeah. Unite. What is that? Her new studio that she's working at to do some contracting work for the story.
Yeah.
That would be great.
All right, so let's move on to the next topic.
Sure.
This one is about New York State pressing legal action against Activision. There's not a ton known about this case right now. It was filed. It was officially filed, I think, a couple days ago. So there's not too much to be known. The core of it. Well, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is what you're about to get into, but it was the details of the case are a little surprising. It's such a roundabout way to get into effectively find a way to request documentation and details about what was going on during this period, like how much Bobby Kotick knew about the harassment allegations, and whether they were hiding things or not, and how this all happened. And Justin, do you want to talk about how the mechanics of this case work?
Well, yeah, and like the framing of it. I think the crux of the case is basically New York has been trying to go about getting documents about the purchase agreement that they have between Microsoft and the sort of time leading up to that, which Activision has not produced these documents. So lawsuit gets filed a couple days ago to get them to basically produce the documents that New York has not seen. The way that they're going about doing this is different than, say, the federal lawsuit and the California lawsuit that more directly deal with the harassment cases themselves. This is saying, hey, as the New York State, we manage the pension funds for our public servants. So it's police officers, firefighters, teachers, etc. All get a pension fund from New York State, and it's pretty hefty given the amount of people they employ. They had invested into Activision and owned stock, and probably a decent amount of stock. They're saying that the behavior of what happened up to the point in which the sale was made, and the sale itself, it suggests that they undervalued the company, and there was a quick move to sell the company to cover Bobby Kotick specifically, and that any of the behavior up to that point that may have been self-serving for Kotick and opposed to the shareholders of the company is grounds for lawsuit. So they're not just going after Activision in this case. They're going after Bobby Kotick specifically and behaviors of Bobby Kotick up to that point. Again, more specifically, the series of events are there was harassment suits with Activision. lawsuits got filed against Activision for the harassment during this period of time leading up to the sale of Microsoft. It had become known that Kotick may have been harboring and protecting people who were offenders, putting him in the crosshairs. And shortly after this information had come out, Kotick had overseen directly the agreement between Microsoft and themselves to sell the company at $95 a share, which was around the same price that the shares were trading for prior to the harassment suits being filed against Activision. And I would say that's grounds enough for it to be suspicious. They allege that Kotick should never have been in charge of overseeing the agreement because he had personal stake in making sure what happened so he could avoid repercussions for his behavior, basically. And so this is why they are seeking to get a bunch of documentation to actually find out what the truth of the matter was and whether or not people within Activision itself knew of this and had any discussions about this, and that would show culpability of Activision for basically undervaluing its stock to protect Kotick.
Yeah, a lot of this is what I was referring to before with like it's such a roundabout way to get there, is that it's like a pension fund that had invested and owned stock in the company is coming at it and saying, hey, this whole lawsuit is a big mess, and it's there are fishy things about this sale that are happening now, and we believe that it's totally devaluing the if you look at all the aspects of the company, aside from the harassment situations that are going on, this is still way below underwater or whatever. Like we are not covering this is a fire sale, and we're not.
It's one of the more charged offenses, though. Like defrauding your investors is actually one of the things that more routinely actually stick to CEOs, because basically you're taking wealthy people and making them less wealthy, and wealthy people don't like that. So there's usually a hangman somewhere in that chain.
Yeah,
right. It's like look at the case of Bernie Madoff in the housing bubble, right? Like generally, there's been worse things that have happened, but they happen to individuals or a group of people by a company. But when a large company who is handling wealthy people's cash and intentionally abuses it, that's when you actually see real legal repercussions against CEOs and higher ups, white collar workers.
It helps that there's a lot of money on the line too in those situations. Yeah,
and in this case, especially, there's no reason to have believed Activision stock would have suffered significantly, and that a sale of Activision, had it not suffered reputation damage, may have very well sold for more than $95 a share.
Right.
So, I mean, I think they probably have a pretty legitimate case here, and in some ways, it's like I don't know about what New York prosecutors' intentions are, but certainly we're seeing a pattern, especially with Activision, that like they're just not getting strong repercussions. This is a pretty widespread harassment case against Activision as a company, and the federal government case settled for $18 million, and we know Kotick had been heavily donating to GOP congressmen, so it's like you don't know how much of the political will there was to actually effectively, seek like restitution, given what Activision did. In the federal case, is pretty clear that like they settled for significantly less than other companies have been able to settle for similar cases.
Right. And then there's the California lead prosecutor being ousted, allegedly ousted.
And the second lead prosecutor quitting.
Yeah, or the assistant to that prosecutor, I think it was.
Yeah, but I think they were both prosecuting. I think it was both like the major prosecutors on the case, and then the first one getting the lead prosecutor getting fired, and the secondary leaving.
Yeah, or resigning or something from the role. Something.
Yes. So
there's some, yeah. Anyway, funny business happening.
In the allegations that Governor Newsom's office was interfering in the case itself to seek information that may have aided Activision's defense to get a more lenient punishment for the behaviors.
Right.
Although it's still not settled, so it's unclear what exactly is happening with that suit right now.
Yeah. Yep. And there's also, this is all on top of the fact that I think it's Activision Blizzard related companies, like in the overall umbrella, that are having labor concerns with unionization efforts as well.
Ravensoft, which is a not an outsourcing group.
The beta test.
They test, but they have developers there too. But they're all in support of World at War, and their QA team specifically overwhelmingly supported unionization efforts, which Ravensoft then pushed for the entire studio to
instead of just the QA team, or they're like, no, you have to be everybody.
So yeah, I mean it's pretty interesting to see New York pursue it differently, and probably in a way that may see stronger repercussions for their behavior, and may add additional information that is not currently known to the fire, because if New York State's suing, like there's probably a handful of other investors that will then have a case as well, and it may even jeopardize the actual purchase of Activision.
Microsoft may get cold feet and say, nah.
Microsoft basically saying, like, well, we're not going to let this tarnish our brand. We don't want to carry this baggage into our brand, so we're letting it go. It's up to them. It's not saying that will definitely happen, but it could compromise it.
Yep. All right. So in other labor dispute related news, our third item for the week is Reggie, Nintendo Reggie.
Reggie Fils-Aimé is what I'm going to stick with.
Yeah. I had a way to put it before, but I'm just going to go with that.
Nintendo Reggie.
He's weighed in this week on the Nintendo labor dispute news item that came up a few weeks ago, where he gave sort of his opinion about the matter and expressed his thoughts. Justin, can you sum those up?
Well, he basically said, in the most politic way possible,
of course,
this doesn't sound like the Nintendo that he oversaw when he was president of NOA. And he went on to cite a specific anecdote, which was basically that I guess during the Wii time frame that he was there, and leading up the growth of that, or the success of that, that he would do these weekly lunches with the team, and that even permatemps were allowed to attend those lunches if they signed up for it. So he's saying, what I think is interesting is his terms are terms that would be used in like a court of law, which is like nothing that's particularly affirmative. He's just saying it doesn't sound like the Nintendo that I was part of, even if he is privy to probably issues or things that he's aware of. He's definitely not saying it. Probably doesn't want to weigh in on it. Doesn't want to do anything that might compromise Nintendo. So he's just basically the most politic way of saying, I don't know.
Right.
Go on.
Yeah. No, I think that does a great job of sort of summing it up. He's being very political with his with his statement. Doesn't want to burn any bridges. Probably still has a ton of friends and people that are at Nintendo. Probably has a ton of stock in Nintendo still. And who knows? Like he was COO, president of Nintendo of America. Like at his level with these. So the people that we're talking about here are permatemp. They're the people that do sort of lower level work. Justin, do you know what specific roles these people are fulfilling for Nintendo?
I think to take a step backwards, it's what does NOA do as as an organization? And NOA rarely does development, if at all. In the sense that like they're building games, even games like from Rare, I think were overseen by Nintendo Japanese
NCL.
NCL and their gaming group. So if you like listen back at the time when Retro was doing either Donkey Kong or Metroid, they would speak often about how Miyamoto would come into the office and direct how the game was progressing.
Right.
So NOA as a company generally doesn't touch games in that sense. They're marketing, publishing, localization, testing for Nintendo published or for games published under Nintendo in North America. Or the Americas in general. I'm not sure if they actually handle like Latin American releases as well, but certainly Canada, Mexico, and the US. So they handle localization efforts for that.
For a long time, they were also, I think, responsible for doing the Nintendo Hotline.
That support is. I think actually support is still within their group. So any sort of
hardware failure, whatever,
software question, all that stuff is all.
But they don't have the same headline anymore, or phone call where you can be like, I'm stuck on level 82 of whatever. How do I proceed? Where they would literally have their, what was it, Nintendo specialists or something like that, their master gamers or something, who would literally have binders of maps and how-tos, and were encouraged to play as many games as they could and master as many games as they could in order to provide hints. Like, I was at like a 1-900 number, and you'd be like, I can't get past this level of Super Mario Brothers 2. How do I do it? And give you hints and walk you through.
Imagine doing that in the era of NES when like games were freaking impossible.
Right. That's the thing. That's I don't understand. I'm like, how many of those people had to deal with people who like literally just couldn't get the timing right on jumps? Like, I can't. I just fell in the hole.
In Ninja Gaiden, just edge to the corner until your foot looks like it's ready to fall off, but your toe is still, like a pixel of your toe is still on the edge. Jump from there, and you'll be able to make the So there's a lot of sort of Nintendo of America sort of fills this role of being not a development wing in the US, but a management wing. Like they manage the business of Nintendo in America. Which to be fair is a large section of Nintendo's profits. So the permatemp positions likely fill things like bulk marketing information, like aspects like screenshots, that sort of thing that would be used in marketing applications, cert testing, and you'd also get like localization efforts. So going through games and doing the localization changes. So I think in the North America, you have to do French, Spanish, and English from Japanese, presumably. If it's a North American game, it's doing the French and Spanish, if not the FIGS conversions. And then I think the last bit of it is likely, guides, manuals, that sort of thing.
It's like doing a lot of the actual grunt work of the day in and day out of business, rather than the big deals. Coordinating with Nintendo of Japan, the Nintendo headquarters. My point in bringing this up is that that's where Reggie spent most of his time, was with other executives at the C level and the P levels. Like, you're not interfacing directly with the permatemp people constantly. I don't know for sure. This is if you just look at the hierarchy of a company, you generally don't, and in the companies that I've been at, unless they're like 10, 20 person companies, and Nintendo is not that. the C suite and executives sort of are off in their own world doing businessy things, and then everybody else, yeah, maybe you see them occasionally for company meetings, but other than that, in the cafeteria if you happen to swing by at the right time. But outside of that, you're not going to have a situation where you're day in day out going to be working with them.
Yeah, the only exception to that might be like the Discord amongst people that might have bubbled up, saying that
yeah, sure,
someone who's handling this is getting a lot of pushback, or they're losing a lot of temp workers. It's slowing down the schedule on this sort of thing, and that would probably make up to C-suite. But it's unclear if that happened during Reggie's tenure. I mean, he was overseeing it at like the worst and best times, right? Like the Wii 3DS time frame was they were handling like two of the biggest successes Nintendo's ever had. But also the Wii U is one of the worst performing consoles that they've ever had. So, in likely what happened during the downturn of the Wii U was a sort of contraction amongst the company as it was trying to, maintain profits. And that might have been when the issue started, and Reggie left at the end of the Wii U timeframe, maybe at the very beginning of the Switch launch, but he was out after that. So he may realistically not be aware of it, or not aware of the depth of it. What's worth bringing up here is that within the past couple days, we actually already covered the lawsuit that was filed by a permatemp hire that was, I guess, trying to provoke some sort of a unionization effort. And the person who alleged this indicates that both the staffing company and Nintendo were coordinating to prevent her from doing this sort of action.
From being able to coordinate, yeah.
Yeah. And we're... I don't know if she
assemble.
Yeah. But shortly after this, IGN published a huge report. It's a highly editorialized report, I will say, but it's a report nonetheless that supposedly collects, anecdotes from permatemp hires and people from Nintendo, and kind of the state of things. And within that, there are more detailed stories about what the permatemp employees were dealing with. Eric, do you want to cover any of that, or do you want me to?
I know less about that. I sort of skimmed over that. The editorial stuff was a little bit like, I can see, I get the gist. But if you know more of the details, yeah, dig into it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so the main things is that they were being held to basically a year-long cycle in which 2 months of the year they were forced to be let go, and then they could be rehired again to maintain a permatemp status. Because in places like Washington, you can only hire a temp for so long before you either have to let them go or you hire them full-time. You can't just keep them in an indefinite status, but instead of actually doing that, companies will then stick to a more strict, we'll hire you for the exact amount of time that we're allowed to. You're let go after that, and we'll get you back in. A very small percentage of those people were converted to full-time employees, although that was always dangled over as a carrot. And apparently they were rigorously held to timesheet accounting for their time, and were micromanaged to the point where people, had suggested that the permatemp position was one of the worst. They were also not given full access to the campus and only had like a side building that they were allowed to operate in the main building where, Reggie would have been operating. They just didn't have access to it. Their key cards wouldn't work on those doors, so they were kept separate, reporting that there was like a 2-tier system and they felt like second-class citizens working in this permatemp position. I guess what I would ask you, Eric, is how normal is that for the game industry? And are there any, would you say that based on these anecdotes, that any of it seems a bit egregious?
So there's two angles to that. I think my experience has been mostly on the developer side rather than the publisher side or the platform side.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for me to speak specifically to whether this is common in the industry. It could be just the side that I'm not familiar with. On if Sony and Microsoft have work with temp agencies to fulfill things around the publishing aspect or the platform marketing aspect of what they do. I don't know. In my travels, I have not met and interacted with many of these people, at least not where did not have the opinion that they were just Nintendo employees. It wasn't something where someone said, I'm a temp working at Nintendo or something.
Yeah.
In the circles that I've had the fortune to run with and interact with. It certainly in the greater tech industry is fairly common. I think there's the idea of having what you were talking about before, where you'll get to a certain point and then temp agencies will cycle people in and out to keep you from obtaining that full-time employee status. That's a legal thing. There are basically, I don't know, actually I can't say that. There are at least many states where the laws are written to protect the employee so that they can't be like ad infinitum treated, used as an employee, but not paid or remunerated as an employee as though they should be.
Right.
They don't get benefits through the employer. They don't get, the employer doesn't have to pay a lot of overhead for this stuff. So they're not really great. This type of hire is not really great for certain positions you would need constantly, but for more rote roles that are less easier to fill with someone who has little experience with the company, great, fine. Like that's sort of how the industry has seen it. The problem is that these people tend to get paid very poorly, relative at least to other situations, because the temp agency has to make its overhead costs, and for the actual employer to save any money, they have to pay less than they would to just hire the person outright. So there's aspects of this where it's like, this temp agency is probably making a good deal. I think in the IGN article, there was a quote where they said there are people lining up outside the door to get their chance to do this job because it's with Nintendo, because people have a great love for Nintendo and a dream to work at Nintendo.
Right.
And they're willing to take a pay cut or a crappy paying job with the chance that they could become a full-time NOA employee.
Right.
And they have incentives, even in the temp status, they have certain incentives you earn enough points for doing certain things above and beyond or exceptionally well, and you can buy from the company store with points instead of money. Like there are these little incentives that they give you to perform well and keep going, that are not actually about being able to use money outside of the company or make
right.
Savings, whatever it would be. And that's something that happens in the tech industry all the time. I'm not sure that the laws that are like you are the laws that are intended to protect employees that are being treated as full-time employees but are actually paid as part-time or temp. I'm not sure that those are particularly helpful for the people as implemented, because some of these temp agencies have found ways to literally just work around them. And that's what sort of we're looking at here.
Well, I'd say is like for the broader game development space, if you are on a developer side of things, there is a point in which if you're only making one game every 3 years or something like that, there is a ramp cycle that goes from concept to alpha development to beta development, and beta development is usually where you start seeing more and more resources pumped into the game, or the development of the game, leading up to final release, and probably the like 4 to 6 month period around the release period is where you need lots and lots of testers on the game. You need to be finding as many bugs as possible and get them found as early on as possible. So you see like this natural ramp, and a lot of temp workers will fill in the jobs of testing, maybe some brute artistry, that sort of thing, and then even your core developers, engineers and artists and whatnot, no longer will have a job after that game releases, and there may be 6 months to a year before you may even be looking for those people again. So those will get laid off. And in California, you see this a lot, and especially in the older game industry, where you only were releasing a game like once every 3 years, and once that game was over, people just scattered about, would move to another studio that was ramping up on their game, and so on. The game industry has changed quite a bit, and a lot of game studios and publishers have distributed the type of work that happens, and the need to have this sort of growth in like, and then the sunset period is less and less of a thing now. And like, I guess on the publisher side of things, for someone like Nintendo, who is constantly testing anything that's going to be released on their platform, and is doing all the localization efforts and all that stuff, like, I think what they're suggesting here is that you could only be hired for this period of time. You would definitely get laid off, and then they would offer to hire you back again. And that seems where there's specific abuse that could actually be under, like, though they're legally doing it, looks like an abuse of a workforce in that sense. And knowing that they had any number of Nintendo employees like ready to walk in ready to get hired for just a chance to work at Nintendo, reeks of either Nintendo being complicit in the abuse, or this specific staffing agency being should have gone under more scrutiny for their hiring behaviors, because indefinite, like every 2 months or every year, 2 months, you'll be forced off the company so that they can maintain a temp status. Seems like abuse of labor practices.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so that sort of is the groundwork for what we're looking at here. And Nintendo of America is going to be using it differently from developers, the temp workers.
Right.
To be fair, on the developer side, if you're using them in that sort of like the ramp cycle, you're going to have a 6-month window to maybe 9-month window where you're going to really need those people. And then a year and a half, 2 years where you're not going to have any need for that person. That is a temp, like an actually a temp position.
Yeah, the publishing side of things, which is a bit different because the publisher is dealing with any title, especially with Nintendo, any title that's being published on a Nintendo platform, and any title that's being published by Nintendo alone. So they should see a very steady flow of work that probably sees a sort of like a bulge that happens around the Christmas time frame. But other than that, like, they should have a pretty steady flow of constant work for temp workers to do. So it seems a little bit more abusive in what they're claiming.
Right. And in terms of like the actual work, when you were talking about the multi-tiered, the 2-tiered system, like that does sound like what I mean, that literally may be one of the ways that Nintendo is suggesting that these, defending itself against allegations that they're just full-time employees being paid less. That they are, yes, they're on site, but they have to be. They are only here for 10 months out of the year, not 12. They, a maximum of 10 months out of the year. They are not allowed on the full campus. They only, they work in a little space, and we bring them work and they do the work and then we get stuff back. Like, this is all potentially legal protection for them. Now, part of the problem that I have here is it sounds as though, from the reactions that these people have, and I'm not sure how much, we don't know without, this will hopefully come out in the court arbitration, or the process of going through the case. But what we don't know is how this position is being marketed to the actual temp workers. If they're saying, like, you could be a Nintendo employee by working with us, work with us for whatever, and selling it as a way to get into NOA, or not being clear about what the position actually entails, and upselling the position as a glorified, you're actually, you can consider yourself a Nintendo employee by working with us. Like that's a problem. If not a necessarily legal one. I don't know the laws where, in Washington or whatever, but like for me as a person in the games industry, I have a serious problem with that because it's misrepresenting the actual work.
Yeah. And what you might also see too is like a a move from Washington State, who'd go, even though Nintendo's one of our like crown employers, that sort of ongoing abuse is going to push them to change the way the temp work laws operate, so that they couldn't do that. This happened in Massachusetts when I was working in Massachusetts. Like you can only hire a temp worker for so long before you have to provide them benefits. And that was one of the things that had been ushered in because labor practices weren't great. And you might see the same sort of thing happen in Washington. The other thing, too, which is probably worth noting, is that NCL is the boss, is like a very much a real boss when it comes to a Nintendo. Everything gets approved by NCL. Different than Sony. Sony, even though Sony's headquartered in Japan, like it is clear that Sony America operates largely independently because it's its largest moneymaker. And although Japan does approve titles finally, Sony America may usurp what Sony corporate says. So there's like this kind of funny balance that you see with Sony and with Nintendo. And all my dealings with Nintendo, it was always like, no, NCL has the final say. So the real question will be is if this continues to percolate and cause more of a PR issue for Nintendo, the real question will be is whether or not NCL will take a more drastic management step with NOA and the way that they're handling their temp employees.
Right.
If anything, they probably do not want the golden star to be tarnished by growing labor issues in this country. So we'll see. Yeah. Anything else to add, Eric?
Not especially. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. Whether who gets slapped on the wrist, if anybody. At least my hope is that the employees, those that are in those positions, are see their conditions improve at the very least, are actually paid for the hard work that they do.
Right. I mean, these are people that help us get Japanese games in English, and that so we can enjoy that. So it's like, I think as gamers, if anybody who watches us is just a gamer, not in the development space, having a blind eye turn to the people who contribute to these things and how low compensation is relative to other industries, that like there are a lot of people that bust their butt to get stuff done and make these games happen and get compensated pretty poorly,
way less,
and go through the grinder to get there. Like these are the people that we should be advocating for, because the games that we get to enjoy are because of people like this, these type of temp workers, and we should have a bit more interest in these sort of labor issues that are bubbling up across the industry now, because it will have an impact on the games that we play in the future.
Yep.
Any other thoughts? We good?
No, I think that's good for this week.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed this program, if you enjoy the type of news that we cover, please like and subscribe. On Twitch, just follow us, and on YouTube, it's hit that thumbs up button and the follow. You'll be notified every Thursday at 6 p.m. when we go live that we've got a show on. So hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next week.
Sounds good.